Hey everyone, welcome back to the series. For this 25th episode milestone, I thought it would be fun to share a little more about my career as a professional artist, from my beginning days at LEGO till now, and showcasing not only my professional art, but also the duality of my personal art behind the scenes, to give you a better overview of who I am as an artist, as well as the experiences that led up to the creation of this whiteboard series. Let's start this off with a proper introduction. My name is Brian Ellis. For the past 20 years, I've worked as a designer and a freelance creative consultant across the toy and entertainment industry. I began my professional design career when I was hired by the LEGO company in 2003. For about the first 2 years with the company, I started out as a designer working on their licensed IP stories and action lines. My day-to-day responsibilities would basically bounce back and forth between building models and producing concept artwork for Star Wars Episode III, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and the newly acquired Batman license. During these first 2 years, after I would finish my LEGO work for the day, I would head back to the LEGO dorms where I would spend most of my evenings working on an independent film project called Enter the Creeps. I took about a solid year to write and finish the script, and from that point on I shifted my focus towards storyboarding out the entire project, as well as producing as much concept artwork as necessary to hopefully one day entice investors and producers to take a chance on me, a first-time, no-name writer and director. The story was essentially a 1950s Technicolor, small-town, alien invasion monster movie. Growing up in the 80s, I was raised on a healthy diet of horror flicks. Either they were on television or they were snuck into the house by older siblings. And back then, when it came to kid-centric monster adventure films, it was really two movies, Goonies or Monster Squad. I was a Monster Squad fan all the way because it had a much darker tone, the stakes were higher, there was violence, kids actually cussing, whereas the Goonies just felt really syrupy to me. So this project was my take on a 1950s sci-fi horror kids film. I invested a lot of time into it, but as with anything film related, movie projects are a dime a dozen. And the prospect of spending years trying to pursue funding just didn't interest me. So I opted instead to move headfirst into my next story project, which was a much more budget-friendly graphic novel called Wellington II. So fast forward now to about late 2005, and this was the time that I was asked to join the LEGO Bionicle design team. This was an awesome opportunity for me because honestly, I just wasn't that thrilled with building models based on movie properties. I mean, the concept art and designs are already in place, so all you really have to do is translate that into bricks. On Bionicle, however, the horizon was open. I'd be able to design and develop something brand new from the ground up and actually add to the evolving story. That's a far more satisfying prospect for any designer. So here's where I really got my first chance to branch out at LEGO, creating and developing new characters, element designs, packaging concepts, weapons, and lots of rough prototypes, which, in case you missed it, I recently covered all this in my 3-part Bionicle retrospective series. And so after I'm off the clock on Bionicle, I would head back home and work late into the night on the Ross Wellington graphic novel with my design school colleague, friend, and co-creator of Ross Wellington, Mark Van Handel. The book is a crime noir set in the late 1940s, and it follows Ross, the sole survivor of the 1947 UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico. While the main character is an alien, this is not a sci-fi odyssey. Our story stays solidly grounded in the world of American crime fiction. Despite us being on different sides of the world, 7 hours apart, we made it work, dedicating a solid 1.5 years of our post-work free time to plotting out and writing all 12 scripts for the miniseries, all in all totaling well over 400 pages in length. What followed would be another 2 arduous years of me slowly chipping away at the artwork, of which I only ever managed to produce the first 4 issues. So this is about the time that I decided to leave LEGO as a full-time designer in order to pursue a career as a freelance creative consultant. So in early 2008, I moved back to the United States and was working out of my home in Milwaukee when I would have to then put my life on pause in order to fly back to Denmark to work in-house once again as a story and concept artist for the LEGO front-end team. And so from 2008 to 2013, I was working with LEGO and their newly formed front-end team. This wound up giving me much more freedom to work on a range of different projects. While on the front-end team, I was heavily involved with testing and developing brand new themes from scratch. World building, character art, story beats, and toy concepts for dozens and dozens of original LEGO properties, most of which were discarded along the way, but some of the most notable properties I worked on eventually manifested as Ninjago and Legends of Chima. During this time, my evenings, however, were still being consumed by the art for Ross Wellington. With each finished page requiring multiple days to produce and color, it just wasn't time efficient or healthy for me to continue pursuing this endeavor with a full-time job. Feeling somewhat like a failure still to this day, I do try to remind myself that I did complete the first book of the story arc, and we did eventually self-publish the book at the end of 2010. Now, Ross was a grueling mental endurance exercise, one I severely underestimated. And so somewhere amidst all the back and forth travel for the front end team, as well as the workload and trying to work on Ross Wellington after hours, I experienced my first real artistic burnout. And if we're being honest, it's really more of a mental breakdown because everything just sort of falls apart and it coincides with relationship issues and all real stemming from just a lack of attention to mental health and excessively burning the candle at both ends. And I probably should have spent a little more time addressing the issues I had stemming from this burnout, but I didn't spend any time recovering, and instead I dove headfirst into another project, which would become my LEGO Vestige project. If you haven't seen the project, I'll link it below, as well as an in-depth making of documentary. It was late August 2010, and I had just come back from a long contract with the front-end team, and I was very exhausted, both mentally and physically. And I remember waking one morning, and I had had this very vivid dream. It was this expanding nebula of Lego bricks surrounding and swirling around a glowing 2x2 sun. And the thing that was most profound about it was in vivid color. Now, I don't dream in color, and for the longest time I thought that was normal. So this had a very profound impact on me. And the first thing I did was get up and try to paint this and recreate it as best as I could and try to capture that moment. This painting became the jumping off point for what would become my take on a more cinematic approach to LEGO advertising. Now, I'm not talking about just another toy commercial, but more so a cinematic legacy piece. Something showcasing the brick itself as an artistic medium while speaking directly to the older audiences that grew up with LEGO. This project would also allow me my first opportunity to direct something live action. So along with my good buddy and co-director Vinny Basese, we independently funded and created this ad, which LEGO had zero knowledge of nor any involvement with. The plan was really simple. Step 1, create the commercial, and step 2, use my connections to pitch it to the execs at LEGO, which we eventually did in 2016. While LEGO advertising of recent years has taken on more of this cinematic aesthetic, back in 2010 that wasn't the case. And so, as egotistical as it sounds, I really wanted my $5,000 experiment, this commercial, to be an example to the advertising agency that with all of their resources and budget, it's possible they could be and should be doing something a little better, something a little more grand and cinematic. And what started out as a simple, seemingly simple project ended up taking about 5 years to finish. So how's that for hubris? Now, most of this is due to the nature of independent ventures where you're waiting for everyone's schedules to align. So sometimes you get to shoot once a month, sometimes only every 6 months. Additionally, to honor the tactile nature of LEGO, I wanted everything in the commercial to be practical. I wanted real props, miniatures, and visual effects. As you'd expect when it's just myself and a handful of friends designing and building every little thing you see on screen, it's no surprise it took 5 years to finish. Probably also comes as no surprise that this time-consuming, painstaking, and extremely mentally exhausting endeavor contributed to my second mental breakdown at the beginning of 2013. For that entire year, I basically refused all freelance work and detached from the world and just kind of ended up wandering aimlessly along the East Coast. I burnt through my savings, what little was there, by staying in Airbnbs with strangers and sometimes with old friends along the way. This was mainly due to a need to kind of reconnect with humans again, because all these years I'd been sitting there alone working, by myself on a digital medium, and it just, everything started to feel confining. I did feel like I was in solitary confinement. So this was a year of searching and therapy for me, and I decided to produce no artwork, mainly focusing on writing. And it was a form of therapy, getting my emotions out and thinking about what was going on in life. And I had ended up channeling a lot of what I was going through into a script, which actually ended up catching the eye of a director of development for the AMC network. This was pretty huge for me because even though the show never got picked up or went anywhere, the whole experience had given me a renewed sense of purpose. And what I ended up doing for the next several years was focusing more on this path of writing in order to tell stories. And so I would be writing television pilots, putting together pitch decks, producing artwork and series Bibles, to then pitch to networks as well as production houses. At this same time, one of my best friends and my ex-LEGO roommate, Mr. Daniel Cruz, reached out to me with an incredible opportunity to direct hundreds of animated LEGO commercials for his Swedish-based Sir Lancelot animation studios. And from 2014 to 2018, I would break down and edit scripts from LEGO copywriters, flesh out shot compositions, time out the action, and then produce detailed animatics for the 3D animation team, who would then work tirelessly to produce the incredible finished commercials. Between my daytime directing work and my nighttime writing, these 4 years were probably the most creatively satisfying years I've experienced throughout my career. So now it's early 2018, and I relocated to Los Angeles to take a full-time job once again with the toy and entertainment company Spin Master. Mainly motivated by a need to connect with a team environment again, this was my first return to the corporate environment in over a decade. This was also the first time I really put all my personal work on hold because I wanted to give this place my entire bandwidth. Here, my duties were essentially a blend of everything I've detailed up to this point. I got to work on a variety of projects, including the Netflix series Mighty Express, Gabby's Dollhouse, the Paw Patrol movie, Unicorn Academy, as well as a bunch of other properties that either got canned or will be coming out soon. The experience had its positives and negatives, but that's just the nature of a corporate environment, which just isn't for me. Thus, after 2 solid years of constant grind, dozens of all-nighters, and no real path for career growth in sight, I felt severely disenfranchised as an artist. So I bowed out, quit the team, and this was the beginning of my 3rd severe artistic burnout. Now seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about the concept of balance. I think if most of us are being honest, our lives are out of balance in some way or another. You know, between a full-time job and travel, relationships, dinner, exercise, entertainment, there's not a whole lot of time left in the evening to now dedicate to a personal project. And that's where my issue always was. I would try to burn the candle at both ends, and this became my sole focus in life. I think early on, I came to believe that being an artist was my purpose in life. And it's an identity that I dove headfirst into, you know, constantly pursuing art after hours. You know, if I wasn't suffering from my art and doing these things, then I wasn't a real artist, you know, whatever that means. So I think in that trapping and that identity game, I got swallowed up in that idea. And time and time again, I just kept diving headfirst into project after project rather than maybe pulling back and saying, hey, it's okay to not do this to yourself. Maybe go experience a little bit of life, or, you know, do something else and reset your focus and, you know, address your mental well-being. And so that's what I've kind of been returning to with this series, is treating my art once again as a form of therapy. Which leads me to the origins of this series. The Whiteboard series has always been an experimental form of therapy for me. I think going back to 2001, it's always been a tool that I've returned to time and again throughout my design career. The first time I remember having a profound experience with it was in 2001 in design school, where a colleague and I were working on a team project together. And we were getting frustrated working on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and we ended up breaking off to a side room where you know, we got to draw big. And so we weren't bound by confines of paper anymore. We could effortlessly jot our ideas down, wipe them away quickly, kind of riff on each other's concepts, and, you know, arrive at a better solution to the problem we were trying to figure out. And it's something that I've returned to time and again, because whenever I would get so tired of working on something digitally, I would always break away to a side room and start drawing on whiteboards again. Just needing to get back to a tactile form of idea generation. And that's what this has become. It's been a return to something tactile for me. And I think there's something in possibly even a haptic memory there, where for those of us as kids that would draw on the walls, you know, for me, that's what it feels like. There is something there that's more satisfying than drawing on tiny pieces of paper, just drawing big. The last company I worked for had conference rooms where the walls were floor-to-ceiling whiteboards. It was phenomenal. So as much as possible, I would camp out in one of those rooms drawing all day. Oftentimes it would result in these giant murals of exploratory designs on the entire wall. After quitting my last job, I really missed those giant dry erase walls. To remedy this, I bought a reasonably large 4x6 whiteboard for my home and started doodling again. It wasn't until the beginning of 2022 that I started thinking, whiteboard markers are cool and all, but is there any way I can make this process more organic, more artistic? I've personally never seen any other artists working on the whiteboard as a medium, and frankly, I've never cared enough to look because I have zero interest in just copying or mimicking what someone else is doing. I mean, up until last year, I wasn't even sure I could purchase whiteboard ink in its pure liquid form. Upon discovering they do indeed sell the ink on its own, the next thought was, okay, well, surely I can dip brushes in it and paint with it, right? And that's when I fell in love with the whiteboard all over again. With each episode, I'm basically learning the ropes. I'm testing myself as well as the boundaries of the ink. In my findings, what I can tell you is this: it's a very unforgiving medium. It can be frenetic and fickle and frustrating. The whiteboard itself works against you. It's very slick, so you put ink on too fast or too thick and it runs. So the whiteboard's working against you, gravity's working against you. If you have dry ink, if you take a wet brush to it, it actually erases the ink. So now your lines are erasing as you're trying to add a little extra detail. You put your hand in the wrong position or something, and you touch the board, then your image gets wiped away. And best of all, there's no underlay, so there's nothing to really paint over or work from. You really have to use your imagination. So every image feels like a battle, and every episode I feel a little more humbled. As with any project, I do find restraints extremely beneficial. So I do employ a series of self-imposed parameters for each painting. The parameters are absolutely a direct result of my experiences in the corporate world, where ideas can be overly scrutinized by too many cooks until all that remains is oatmeal. Parameter number 1, try to finish every painting in roughly 60 minutes. Sprinting to a finish can be a lot of fun, but sprinting towards an endlessly moving goalpost, not so much. Get in, make your marks, get out. Parameter number 2, try to only paint from memory or imagination. Generally, in order to meet the needs of executives and corporate folk, the majority of whom are not artists, I have to exercise a major degree of control over my digital work. So I'm constantly staring at loads of photographic reference all day long. On the whiteboard, however, I don't want additional distractions, so I try to keep any visual reference to an absolute bare minimum. Parameter number 3, don't try to control the outcome, aka don't be a fluekneppe. That's a term I heard my Danish colleagues tossing around the office during my time at Lego, as in someone obsessed with insignificant details. So while most of my professional digital work is very clean and polished, I prefer to stay a little rough and loose with my whiteboard art, letting happy accidents unfold before you and having the presence of mind to truly appreciate them in the moment. Beyond all this, when you work on so many personal projects in secrecy for years at a time, it's very easy to experience burnout before you've had the opportunity to share your work with anyone. So ultimately, the immediacy of this whiteboard series is incredibly satisfying when compared to the long-haul projects I've done in the past. Well, whether it's obvious or not by this point, my passion has always been storytelling. That's the red thread that runs through all of my work. However, when it comes to the individual elements such as writing, storyboarding, sculpting maquettes, creating concept art, I don't actually enjoy any one of those things by themselves. It's only when those mediums are working together in tandem to service a larger story that I feel anything. And that's what this whiteboard series has been for me. It's been a creative outlet that allows me to balance my art, myself, and my storytelling, and in the end to share that journey with you. I'd also like to take a quick second to properly thank and acknowledge Phantom Antenna for their contributions to this series. From the opening theme music to the original compositions written for every episode of this series. Thank you so much for your contributions and for supporting me in this journey. So thank you again for watching. I really appreciate you tuning back in and hope to see you here for the next one.